concubinage in the Islamic world resulted in slave girls becoming a status symbol. The number, reputed beauty, musical or poetic talent, and ethnic variety of a man's collection of concubines demonstrated wealth and sophistication. Compared to the European North, where prestige was measured by well-bred horses, servants in livery, and large castles. For example, Charlemagne had 10 known wives and concubines, from whom he had 18 children. His peer, Harun al-Rashid, famous in the 1001 Arabian Nights and ruler during Baghdad's Golden Age, is famous for having 2,000 concubines, although it seems that only 24 of them produced children for him. Harun al-Rashid was surrounded by so many superfluous slave women that during the hot Baghdadi summers, he would perch them around the room in dripping wet, perfumed clothes to serve as human air conditioners. But his was not the largest Muslim harem. That honor went to a later Abbasid caliph, Mutawakkil, who claimed to have enjoyed each of his 4,000 concubines. Perhaps one of the most successful imitators of the Abbasids was the Moroccan king Moulay Ismail, who claimed a harem of 2,000, mostly European girls caught by the Barbary pirates. He's a Guinness Book record holder, alleged to have fathered 888 children, although only 867 offspring were officially counted. He did propose marriage to Louis XIV's daughter, Marianne de Bourbon, but for some unknown reason, she refused his proposal. Of course, the European elite did own slaves and had concubines, both slave and free. In Europe, though, marriage was very much limited to those of equal status, leaving to slaves or lower-class women the relationships of sexual convenience or desire. The Europeans did have one exception. The Merovingians, a Frankish dynasty in which a few royals did marry their slaves or concubines. This doesn't always change when I click it, sorry about that. The Merovingians had slaves and married their slaves and concubines. One of these, an Anglo-Saxon slave girl, became queen, and Saint Valpin, who was married to Clovis II. After his early death, at around age 20, she ruled as the regent of his eldest of 3 sons until the boy came of age. She is remembered for her capable statesmanship, but was canonized for her charity to slaves, help for the poor, and contributions to monasteries. Despite this Merovingian exception, on the whole, concubines in Europe were defamed by society, not particularly for their slippery sexual, reproductive, or legal status, but for their lower class origins. In contrast, their southern concubine counterparts, all foreign slaves, either purchased, captured in war, or sent as tribute payments from defeated lands, brought prestige to their owners. Slaves were also chosen by almost all of the Islamic rulers to perpetuate their dynasties, free of interference from mother-in-laws, well, alliances with the elite, or neighboring kingdoms. While Europe only remembers a couple of slave queen mothers, it's hard to find an Islamic queen mother who was not a slave. The vast majority of caliphs, amirs, sultans, and even Shiite Mahdis were born from foreign concubines. Now, the royalty were not the only ones using slaves for reproduction. Masjid Robinson has done a prosopography of mothers mentioned in biographical dictionaries of the elite Qurayshi tribe. The Quraysh of Muhammad's tribe reaped the first fruits of conquest, which included a huge number of young girls. By the 3rd generation after Muhammad, 42% of all Qurayshis had been born from a slave woman. Michael Dan studied the mothers in the line of the Shiite Mahdis descending from Muhammad via his daughter Fatima, and shows that they were slaves, often given royal identities, perhaps invented, originating in Persia and Babylon. Oh, Persia and Byzantium. Through an acceptance of concubinage in religious text and even a preference for reproduction by concubines, female slaves were able to access social mobility to elite Muslim society that their concubine sisters in Christian Europe could not even imagine. For the most part, the European post-Roman world continued using Roman slave codes. One of the major differences there, compared to the Islamic world, was the law referencing free or slave status of children born to slave women. For slaves in the Christian North, children inherited their mother's free or slave status, and so slavery continued for generations, eventually evolving into permanent unfree labor tied to land, a form of slavery we now call serfdom. In actual practice, many fathers did recognize and free their children born of slave mothers. It's when the relatives fight for inheritance in the court records that we can see that the concubinage in the West evolved into a kind of common law marriage with rights. But for the Islamic areas of the Mediterranean, a child who was recognized by the owner as his own offspring was born free. At birth, the child's slave mother went from the status of Jawari to the status of Walad, which is Arabic for mother of a child. The legal ramifications of birth, even if the child died, was that the mother could not be sold and was to be freed when her owner died. Becoming an Walad wasn't the only way out of Islamic slavery. While both Christianity and Islam encouraged manumission of slaves, the Quran provided spiritual currency for those Muslims who freed their slaves. The Quran advocated manumission of slaves as an act of a righteous person, and according to the Quran, freeing slaves would bring forgiveness for the sins of killing, for a futile oath, and for reneging on a zihar divorce. For female slaves, however, their gendered ability to produce a child provided a more sure route out of slavery as long as the owner's heirs obeyed religious rulings to free them, which legal disputes show was not always a given, according to Dr. Johan Misra's research. Of course, this freedom could be a two-edged sword. After manumission, the owner's heirs and sons by other women had no more obligation to house, feed, and clothe the rival of their mothers. If a concubine's own child had died or was a girl or unable to care for them, their impoverished old age could be worse than bondage.